Hello and welcome to another Blender Absolute Beginner tutorial. I'm back, it's been a while, but I've appreciated all the commentary you guys have left. I've read all of it, and I'm back in it, trying to help you guys out, learn some more Blender. Um, just a couple of notes. I have updated to the newest Blender. My previous tutorial was a little bit out of date, I think it was more than a year ago, but all the tools that I introduced and everything that I talked about is still up to date. Another thing I wanted to show you is I have turned on this screencast keys, which instead of the other display to show what keys I'm pressing, it's a plugin in Blender. I'll put a link in the notes below this video if you're interested in doing that yourself. But it's just a plugin that'll show the keys and mouse clicks down here. Instead of where I had it before with an external program. So it's just a little bit nicer looking, and let me know if you have any problems with that. The other thing is this, since I'm just getting back into tutorials after over a year now, I am going to start out a little simple. It's still going to be something new, but it's just going to be a quick, simple tutorial on, today we're going to talk about sculpting. So there's a mode, just like object mode and edit mode, there's a mode called sculpt mode. And what sculpt mode does, you'll see this circle around my cursor now. It lets you actually, as if you had a knife or whatever they use to sculpt, some sculpting tools, chisels, whatever, to carve or to shape this as if it were a block of clay. That's what sculpting allows you to do. Now, sculpting, how the algorithm works is it just displaces vertices and points. So if we switch over to edit mode, we can see that we have, what is that, 8 vertices. And so if we're going to displace them, all I can really do is just shift out corners and not do very much with this brush. And I'll get into this later. But you'll see there's kind of this problem as far as being able to sculpt. So one of the things you need to do when you go sculpt is you need to have a lot of vertices. There's two ways we know of to have more vertices, to have a really fine mesh on our object. There's two ways to do it that are really simple. The first is we can use a modifier. We can add a modifier called subdivision surface and just crank up the subdivisions, and that's all well and great. It'll turn into a circle. My preferred method, at least for showing it off, is, and I mean this is totally valid method, my preferred method is to come over to the toolbox, which you can bring up or turn off with T, and you're going to want to click this add subdivide. Now make sure you're in edit mode, make sure your objects are selected, because if you only have one face selected, it'll just subdivide that face. So you can make sure everything's selected with A, and then just click subdivide, and it'll start subdividing. Now, word of warning, as you subdivide this, you can see up here, it may be hard to see on this video because this is black on gray, but up on this top, underneath the title bar, it'll show you the number of vertices, the number of edges, and the number of faces that you have. This is important because if you have too many, this will bring your system to its knees. This will cause crazy lag, and it will not allow you to model at all. It'll just, you can't go too many vertices at a time. That's one reason why when we talked about layers, that's one reason we have layers, is so we can separate them and not have too many showing at the same time, because your computer has to keep track and has to manage all of those. So be careful as you click subdivide. Don't go too fine. My system right now is a, my graphics card is a Radeon HD 6870, and my processor is a Core i5 Sandy Bridge. So it's not brand new, but it's a pretty good system. And I can handle probably from the default view where it's becomes solid orange. I believe that's about 25,000 vertices. So this fine mesh is what I can handle nicely and without any problems. If you're running on a laptop, I would probably go one less than this. You'll notice, and you can always Control Z to back out if it gets a little too laggy. But it is exponential, so the more you go, it'll be exponentially more laggy on your system. So just a word of warning there, be careful. And then now with all these vertices to displace, we can jump into sculpting mode. So if you've already selected it, you can just tab over, or you can just come down here and select sculpt mode. Couple of things to go over. You have a brush, first of all. The brush is the picture and the options immediately under it. The default brush is the sculpt draw, I believe. And I don't know, there's a ton of different brushes. I don't know all about all the different brushes. There's a picture to give you an idea of what it does. The main ones I use are the gray ones that I've seen. And most of them have a radius. This allows the circle. It's the radius of the circle that follows your cursor. It allows you to go bigger or smaller as far as that goes. I'll bring it down to maybe I don't know, 18 sounds good. And then, you know what, I'm just going to show you what this does. Let's zoom in. I'm just going to left click and pull it across this surface. And you'll see that it just displaces them. It pulls all of those up. And I'll switch over to edit mode so you can see what I'm talking about. It actually pulls those vertices up as I drag it across. So one thing you can do is you can turn up strength or turn it down to go higher or lower. Turning it up really makes it apparent in this video, so I'm going to turn it up all the way, and you can see I can just pull it along all those vertices. You can see it's a little pixelated. That's just because of the mesh. I could probably go one more just fine on the subdivide, but the finer you get it, the less pixelated it'll look essentially. There's also this add or subtract option. Now that's pretty simple. Add is the default, it pulls it out, and subtract pushes it in. So if you look at this in the mesh, there's actually one coming out and one going in. Pretty simple. You can also switch between them by holding Control as you pull. It'll just switch. So right now I have subtract selected, and it'll subtract. If I hold Control down and pull, it will push it out, and vice versa. If I have add, it'll add, hold down Control, and it'll subtract. So Control is an easy way to switch between adding and subtracting on the fly while you're sculpting. And also there is, I'm going to turn up the radius. There's a brush called Smooth right here. And if you want to do that, you can hold down Shift and drag, and it'll automatically, you can see when I click, holding down Shift, when I click, this will change to Smooth. And what that does is it'll essentially smooth out based on the ones around it, kind of like a blur tool in Photoshop or something like that. It's based on the vertices around where your brush is centered. It'll kind of average them and make it look a little smoother, blur it out. And that's a useful tool as well to get a nice, good looking model. Alright, so gone over all the options that you need to worry about. Now I'm just going to show you an example of how to use this. So we can go to Blob, and Blob is just a really strong pulling out of vertices. So I'm going to pull out these corners just like that, and I'm just holding down the cursor and moving it around. I'm just going to make a little circle here, and make some circles here, and then I'm going to switch over to the F brush because it's a little smoother. I'm just going to make a little face here. I don't know if that's a pig or what. Looks like a pig. We'll call it a pig. So I'm holding down Control to go in, make little divots for the eyes, and that is essentially sculpting. You can do whatever you want. You could, since we could crank up the strength, and we could just like cut into these edges to make it not as harsh. So you can see it can really do some amazing stuff. It's great for if you're trying to make an organic looking model. If you're trying to make something that's smoother, not as rigid like we've done before. You can remember we made the robot looking guy, and then we just turned him and we did a modifier or something that made him look smooth. But this is a way to actually get him smooth, to get some maybe imperfections or textures in there on the mesh that you wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. It's not, for example, this is not something even though it's hideous, it's not something I could make without a sculpting mode. Now, there are some limitations, and this is the last thing I'll go over in this tutorial, but there's some limitations to sculpting mode. Number one, and let me show you this, if I pull out this blob and say I want to do something really, let's turn up this strength, really protruding out of this side, and I just want to keep going and keep going. Since it only stretches the mesh, it doesn't actually add in vertices or add in lines, you can see that this is getting very, very square and harsh looking. And I'll switch to the edit mode. You can see, so this fine mesh is now getting really stretched out and it's showing. And that's one limitation, is that it doesn't really add in the detail. You have to start with the detail and then form it. So that's one thing to be careful of. And I could always just select this and subdivide it further if I wanted to. The other limitation is what I've already mentioned, the number of vertices. This is a taxing thing on your system. If you're on an older laptop, you may not be able to sculpt as effectively as on a up-to-date desktop. So those are limitations. Number one, it stretches. Number two, the vertices. If you're very interested in sculpting, I'm going to put a note down in the below this video, and you can check it out. There's this thing called dynamic topology sculpting. I'll put a link to another tutorial that I saw recently. I just kind of skimmed through it. It didn't interest me that much, but what it does is it will, and it's if you're in sculpt mode, just give you a heads up right here, you can actually turn it on underneath in these options, and I won't go looking for it now because I didn't prepare this. But what it does is it will add in the vertices for you, so you don't have to subdivide to begin with. What it does is it has an algorithm that will tessellate, and that's something to look up if you're curious. It will tessellate the model, and it will add in lines and vertices dynamically as you sculpt. If you're really into sculpting, it's a great thing to learn and check out. But as a starter point, I think just subdividing and adding in detail with these brushes is all you need to do. So that's my tutorial for now. Next week we're going to look at how to get this kind of detail without necessarily having a fine mesh. We're going to look at bump maps a little bit next week. So this week was sculpting. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm back. If you have questions, go ahead and post them below. If you love it, go ahead and post that below too. And I'll see you guys next week. Thanks.